The galactic kingdom of Verelion had ruled its corner of the stars for more than 60,000 cycles. Its cities were grown, not built, shaped from living crystal and ancient biostone that glowed softly under 3 suns. Its fleets guarded trade lanes that connected hundreds of species. Its laws were studied across the galaxy. Yet for all its power and age, the kingdom was dying in the quietest way possible. The royal bloodline was ending. Queen Aurelian stood alone on the high balcony of the Star Throne, looking down at the capital world. She looked young to outsiders, her silver skin smooth, her eyes bright like polished gems, but her age was measured in centuries. She had ruled wisely and patiently, but wisdom could not solve one problem that haunted her every waking cycle. Her people were few, and they were becoming fewer still. The Verelian species lived long lives, but they reproduced rarely, and royal offspring were rarer than collapsing stars. Without heirs, the kingdom would fracture. Old alliances would fail. Ancient enemies would return. Everything she had protected would fall apart. Slowly and painfully. That was why the summons had been sent. Across known space, the Queen's call echoed through data relays and diplomatic channels. She did not hide her need. She did not soften the truth. She needed a partner strong enough to give her powerful grandchildren, heirs who could survive the future and lead the kingdom when she was gone. The response was overwhelming. They came from worlds of fire and ice, from high-gravity planets and floating cities. Noble bloodlines arrived with long lists of achievements. Engineered beings stepped forward, their bodies shaped by generations of careful design. Psionic masters came wrapped in invisible power, their thoughts sharp and heavy in the air. Even ancient machine hybrids, part flesh and part living metal, requested permission to stand before the throne. The grand hall filled with expectation and pride. Each candidate was tested, not for strength alone, but for compatibility. The royal scientists ran scans older than most civilizations. Genetic harmonics, neural resonance, survival probability models. The tests were precise, unforgiving, and absolute. One by one, the results returned the same answer: incompatible. Some candidates were powerful but unstable. Others were brilliant but lacked adaptability. A few were perfect in every measured way. Yet something unseen caused the ancient systems to reject them. Days turned into weeks. Whispers filled the hallways. Advisors spoke in worried tones behind sealed doors. The Queen watched it all with a calm face and a heavy heart. On the final day of trials, the Grand Hall was quieter than it had ever been. Only a handful of candidates remained, and none inspired confidence. The ancient scanners hovered in the air, their light dimmer now, as if even they were tired of failure. The chief geneticist bowed low before the throne. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "these are the final confirmed candidates. If none are suitable, the probability of producing viable royal heirs drops below survivable limits." The Queen closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, her voice was steady. "Begin." The remaining candidates stepped forward. The scans activated. Light passed over bodies both strange and beautiful. Data flowed. Calculations ran. Incompatible. 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 Silence fell. No one spoke. No one moved. The Grand Hall, once filled with hope and noise, now felt hollow. Advisors avoided the Queen's gaze. Guards stood rigid, pretending not to sense the weight of history pressing down on the room. Then, from the back of the hall, a voice spoke. "May I step forward?" Every head turned. The speaker stood far from the throne, almost lost among the tall figures of other species. He was shorter than most, with a simple, upright stance and no visible enhancements. His clothing was plain, functional, and worn from travel. He carried no symbols of rank, no signs of power. He was human. A low murmur spread instantly. Some laughed softly. Others stared in confusion. A few advisors exchanged sharp looks of disbelief. "A human?" someone whispered. "This is a royal trial. They are unmodified," another said. "No natural psionics, no enhanced longevity. Why is he even here?" The Queen studied him closely. Humans were known across the galaxy, but rarely as rulers. They were short-lived compared to most starfaring species. They had only recently reached the wider galactic stage. Their technology was clever but rough, their bodies fragile by many standards. And yet, something about the way he stood drew her attention. He did not bow deeply or lower his eyes in fear. He showed respect, but not submission. His gaze was steady, curious, and calm. "What is your name?" the Queen asked. "Elias Carter," he replied. His voice was clear, without arrogance. "Citizen of Earth. Independent explorer." A ripple of reaction followed. Independent meant no backing faction, no powerful sponsors. Just one man, standing alone. "You understand the nature of this summons," the Queen said. "This is not an honor trial. It is a matter of survival." "Yes, Your Majesty," Elias said. "I understand." One of the senior advisors stepped forward, struggling to keep his tone polite. "Your Majesty, with respect, humans have already been evaluated in past cycles. Their compatibility scores are low, their lifespans are brief. This is a waste of time." Elias did not argue. He did not interrupt. He simply waited. The Queen raised a hand, and the advisor fell silent. "Why did you come?" she asked Elias. He considered the question carefully before answering. "Because your message was honest," he said. "You did not ask for glory or conquest. You asked for a future. Humans understand that kind of fear." Some in the hall frowned. Others leaned forward slightly, listening despite themselves. "You believe you are suitable?" the Queen asked. "I believe," Elias said slowly, "that humans are often measured wrong. We are not built to be perfect. We are built to endure." A few scientists exchanged skeptical looks. The chief geneticist cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, the systems. Run the scan," the Queen said. The hall went still. The scanners shifted position, their light focusing on Elias. Initial readings came back instantly. Low baseline strength, average neural density, short projected lifespan. The murmurs returned, louder this time. Then, the scanners paused. Data streams slowed, then changed pattern. The lights pulsed unevenly. "That is unusual," one scientist said quietly. "What is it doing?" another asked. The chief geneticist frowned, tapping commands into his console. "The system is attempting adaptive modeling. It rarely does that at this stage." On the display, probabilities fluctuated instead of settling. Genetic pathways that should have remained dormant began to light up under simulated stress. The system introduced higher pressures, harsher conditions. Elias winced slightly but remained standing. His heart rate rose, then stabilized. His neural activity spiked, not chaotically, but in complex patterns. The scanners adjusted again, as if responding to him rather than testing him. "This makes no sense," the chief geneticist whispered. "He is not resisting the conditions. He is adapting to them." The Queen leaned forward. "Explain." "Most species," the scientist said slowly, "possess fixed strengths. Humans appear to possess potential. Their systems change when challenged. The model cannot predict an upper limit." The hall fell silent again. This time, for a very different reason. The final result appeared on the main display. Compatibility, unknown. Not incompatible. Not approved. Unknown. No one had seen that result in living memory. The Queen rose from her throne. "Elias Carter," she said, her voice carrying through the hall. "You understand that stepping further means there is no retreat." He met her gaze. "Yes, Your Majesty." A faint, rare smile touched her lips. "Then the trials will continue." For the first time in many cycles, hope returned to the Grand Hall, not loud, not certain, but alive. The announcement that the trials would continue spread through the palace faster than any official message. By the next cycle, the Grand Hall was full again, not with celebration, but with tension. Advisors whispered in tight groups. Scientists reviewed data again and again, trying to convince themselves that the scanners had not failed. Guards stood at every entrance, their posture stiff, as if the very air had become uncertain. Elias Carter was given quarters deep within the royal complex. They were not luxurious, but they were safe. He slept lightly, his mind restless. He knew that every step forward placed him further from the simple life he once lived among the stars. Yet he felt no regret. Somewhere deep inside, he sensed that this place, this moment, mattered. The next day, the trials began again. These were not tests meant for diplomacy or appearance. They were ancient, dangerous, and absolute. Many had been removed from history records because no one had passed them in centuries. The Varelian people believed that true rulers were not born ready, but revealed under pressure. Elias was escorted into the first chamber, a vast, circular room with no visible walls. The floor shimmered like liquid metal. Above him, unseen systems activated. "This chamber measures mental endurance," a calm voice announced. "You may withdraw at any time." Elias nodded once. The pressure began gently. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through his bones. Images appeared around him, drawn from his own memories. Earth skies. Empty space. Faces of people he once knew. The system searched for fear, regret, weakness. Most species broke quickly here, minds shattered under the weight of their own past. Elias felt the memories press in, sharp and heavy. He remembered loss. He remembered failure. His breathing slowed. He did not push the memories away. He accepted them, letting them pass like waves. The system increased intensity. The hum deepened. The images twisted. Failures repeated. Magnified. Futures where he was alone. Futures where he was powerless. His hands trembled slightly, but he stayed standing. Observers watched in silence. The chief neural scientist frowned. "He is not shielding," she said. "He is processing." Minutes passed, then hours. The system finally disengaged. "Subject remains coherent," the voice announced. "Mental endurance exceeds modeled parameters." Elias exhaled slowly, sweat cooling on his skin. The second trial began immediately. This chamber was smaller, colder. Gravity increased in slow increments. For species from lighter worlds, this test was often fatal. Bones cracked. Organs failed. Elias felt his weight double, then triple. His muscles strained. His knees bent, but he did not fall. He adjusted his stance, distributing his weight. His breathing became controlled, measured. The gravity climbed higher. Alarms flickered briefly, then stabilized. "Structural stress detected," a scientist said nervously. "Human skeletal limits should have been exceeded, but they are not," another replied. "Micro-adaptations are occurring in real time." Elias collapsed to one knee, then pushed himself back up. Pain burned through his body, sharp and constant. He focused on one simple goal: stay upright. When the gravity finally returned to normal, he dropped to the floor, gasping. Medical teams rushed forward, but he waved them away, forcing himself to stand again. "I'm fine," he said hoarsely. The third trial was never meant to be attempted by outsiders. The Queen herself watched from behind a transparent barrier as Elias entered a chamber filled with shifting light. This test simulated hostile environments across the galaxy: radiation storms, toxic atmospheres, thermal extremes. Protective fields surrounded him, but only barely. The system wanted to see how his body reacted, not how it was shielded. Heat surged, cold followed, pressure fluctuated wildly. Elias screamed once, then clenched his jaw. His skin flushed, then paled. His body struggled, then adjusted. Heart rate spiked, then stabilized again. "This is impossible," the chief geneticist whispered. "There is no fixed template. His body is rewriting responses as needed." The Queen's eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in awe. The test ended abruptly when the system reached an internal limit. "Further exposure may cause unpredictable evolution," the voice warned. The chamber opened. Elias stumbled out, supported by medics this time. His body shook with exhaustion, but his eyes were clear. He looked toward the Queen, waiting. That night, the council convened in secrecy. "This is reckless," one advisor said sharply. We are gambling the future of the kingdom on an unknown variable. An unknown variable that survives where certainty has failed. Another countered. The humans are short-lived, a third argued. Even if compatible, he will not last. The queen listened without interrupting. When the room finally quieted, she spoke. Strength that fades is not weakness, she said. Adaptation outlives power. The final trial was not physical. Elias was brought before the queen alone, in a quiet chamber filled with living light. No scanners. No guards. This is not a test you can prepare for, she said. It is a question. She activated a projection. The image showed the future of Virelion, as predicted by countless models. Fragmentation. Civil war. External invasion. Slow extinction. If you proceed, she said, your life will no longer be your own. You will be bound to this fate. Elias studied the projection for a long time. You could leave, the queen continued. No dishonor would follow you. He turned to her. Humans do not survive by leaving every difficult path, he said. We survive by walking into them together. She searched his face, ancient instincts weighing his words. Do you desire power? She asked. No, Elias replied. I respect responsibility. Silence filled the chamber. At last, the queen nodded. The trials are complete. When the announcement was made public, shock rippled through the kingdom. Elias Carter was declared provisionally compatible. Not approved, not rejected, provisionally accepted. For the first time in recorded history, the royal bloodline faced a future that could not be predicted. Some feared it. Others felt hope ignite in their hearts. Elias stood on the same balcony where the queen once stood alone. He looked out at the glowing city, aware that the hardest trials were still ahead. Far beyond the palace, across the galaxy, unseen forces began to pay attention. Humanity had stepped forward, and the stars were starting to notice. The years that followed changed the kingdom of Virelion in ways no model could predict. What began as a quiet, uncertain experiment slowly became the center of the galaxy's attention. Elias Carter remained within the royal complex, not as a prisoner and not as a ruler, but as something entirely new. He was watched, studied, questioned, and doubted every single day. The queen did not rush anything. Virelion traditions were slow, careful, and deeply rooted in patience. Time itself was treated as a tool. Elias learned the customs of the court, the language of the nobles, and the weight of the history that surrounded him. He made mistakes. He asked too many questions. He spoke too honestly at times. But he listened more than he spoke, and that earned him quiet respect. The compatibility process continued, not through machines, but through life itself. When the first child was born, the palace did not celebrate loudly. There were no grand announcements, no galaxy-wide signals. The child was taken immediately to a sealed observation wing, surrounded by medical teams and sensors older than most empires. The child was small, quiet, and alert. At first, there was disappointment. No glowing aura. No visible signs of great power. The nobles whispered again, reminding each other that humans were fragile, that this outcome had been expected. Then the child opened their eyes. The sensors reacted instantly. Neural activity spiked in complex patterns. The child's gaze focused with unnatural clarity, tracking movement, light, sound, not randomly, but with purpose. She is learning, a scientist said softly. Already, within weeks, it became clear that this child did not develop like any known species. Physical growth was steady, but mental development moved in sudden leaps. She observed everything. She adapted to routines, then grew bored of them. When exposed to language, she did not repeat sounds. She understood meaning. The queen visited often, standing silently beside the observation glass. She is not powerful, an advisor said cautiously. She is something else. She is becoming, the queen replied. The second child arrived 2 years later, then the third. Each was different. One showed unusual control over bioenergy, not through raw output, but through efficiency. Another demonstrated instinctive understanding of systems and patterns, solving logic constructs meant for advanced artificial minds. The third showed emotional depth far beyond their age, sensing tension, calming conflict, bringing unity without words. None of them shattered walls or bent stars. They did something far more unsettling. They learned. As the children grew, the court's fear shifted from disappointment to uncertainty. These heirs did not fit any existing category. They did not rely on inherited dominance. They responded to challenge by changing themselves. Teachers assigned to them found their methods questioned, then quietly abandoned. Military strategists ran simulations with them as observers, only to find the children asking questions that exposed flaws no one else had seen. "They are not faster than us," one commander admitted. "They see differently." Beyond the palace, rumors spread. Other kingdoms began to take notice. Intelligence networks reported strange developments within Verelion. No official displays of power. Yet internal stability increased. Disputes that once lasted decades resolved quietly. Resource systems became more efficient. Defensive formations were reorganized without explanation. Foreign observers could not identify a single cause. Inside the palace, not everyone was pleased. A faction of nobles believed the royal bloodline had been corrupted. They whispered of ancient purity laws, of destinies written before humanity had ever reached the stars. They feared a future they could not control. "They will replace us," one noble said during a secret gathering. Not with force, but with irrelevance. Plans were formed in silence. The attempt came without warning. A containment failure was triggered in the education wing where the children trained. Environmental controls shut down. Gravity spiked. Emergency systems locked out. It was meant to look like an accident. Alarms echoed through the palace. Guards rushed to sealed doors. Scientists shouted commands into dead systems. Inside the chamber, the children felt the pressure instantly. Gravity pulled at their bodies. The air grew thin. The oldest child steadied herself. She did not panic. She remembered every challenge she had ever faced. "Stay close," she said calmly. The others did. As the pressure increased, something remarkable happened. The children did not resist individually. They adjusted together. One shifted posture to support another. One controlled breathing patterns. One focused on stabilizing movement. They survived long enough for systems to reboot. When the doors finally opened, the children were standing, shaken but alive. The investigation that followed was swift and unforgiving. Evidence was uncovered. The faction was exposed. Some fled. Others were removed from power. The queen did not order punishment driven by anger. She ordered removal driven by necessity. "The future cannot be shaped by fear," she declared. Across the galaxy, tensions grew. A neighboring alliance, long wary of Verelion's influence, began military preparations. They claimed concern. They spoke of balance. In truth, they feared what they did not understand. Their fleets moved toward contested space. The queen convened her council. Military leaders argued for preemptive defense. Generals demanded displays of strength. Then the queen did something unprecedented. She invited the children to observe. They watched fleet projections. They listened to arguments. They asked questions no one expected. "Why do they fear us?" one asked. "Because they think we will dominate," an advisor replied. "Do we need to?" another child asked quietly. The room fell silent. With the queen's permission, the children proposed an alternative. Not surrender. Not aggression. Adaptation. Verelion fleets repositioned, not to threaten, but to protect trade lanes used by all sides. Human-style logistics were introduced. Flexible command structures replaced rigid hierarchies. Communication channels were opened, not with demands, but with clarity. The enemy alliance hesitated. Their models failed. Verelion was not acting like a declining power. It was not acting like an expanding empire either. It was acting like something patient and resilient. A single engagement occurred on the edge of neutral space. No massive battle, just a test of force. Verelion ships moved in unexpected patterns. absorbing pressure, redirecting momentum. Enemy commanders found themselves reacting instead of leading. The conflict ended before it could escalate. When peace talks began, the children were present, silent observers once more. Their presence alone unsettled the opposing delegates. "They do not radiate power," one whispered. "They radiate certainty." Elias watched from a distance, pride and worry balanced in his expression. He had never sought this future. Yet it had grown from him in ways he could not control. The queen joined him. "You gave us something rare," she said. "Not strength that demands obedience, but strength that invites cooperation." Elias looked at the stars beyond the palace walls. "Humans learned long ago," he said, "that survival is not about being the strongest. It's about becoming what the future requires." Far across the galaxy, ancient observers recorded the changes. They had seen empires rise and fall for millions of years. This was different. A new kind of legacy was forming, one that did not burn bright and vanish, one that adapted, endured, and quietly reshaped everything around it. And the children were only just beginning. The galaxy did not change all at once. It never did. Change came slowly, like gravity, unseen but impossible to escape. After the failed confrontation and the quiet peace that followed, many believed the danger had passed. They were wrong. What had ended was only the first test. What followed would decide whether the kingdom of Verelion survived or became a warning remembered by others. Years passed, and the children grew. They were no longer confined to observation wings or guarded halls. They walked the palace openly now, studied with scholars, trained with commanders, and listened to the stories of workers, traders, and travelers from distant worlds. They did not demand loyalty. They earned trust by understanding. Each child developed in a different direction, but all shared the same core trait. When faced with something unknown, they did not freeze or break. They adapted. The oldest became skilled at strategy, not through aggression, but through prediction. She could look at a system and see how it would change under pressure. The second became a bridge between cultures, learning languages and customs at a pace that astonished diplomats. The third focused on science and systems, improving existing technology rather than replacing it, making old things stronger instead of discarding them. They were not rulers yet, they were preparing. Beyond Verelion's space, something ancient stirred. Deep in the dark regions between spiral arms, an old power observed the shifting patterns. This entity, known only in fragments of forbidden archives, had existed before many civilizations learned to travel between stars. It believed in a single truth: stability was weakness. Change invited chaos. Chaos needed correction. It had ended countless rising powers before. When its probes reached Verelion borders, they did not attack. They watched. They learned. They calculated. Then they acted. Without warning, communication relays across several systems went silent. Trade routes collapsed. Defense platforms failed in synchronized patterns. No explosions, no fleets, just absence. Panic spread quickly. "This is not conventional warfare," military leaders said. "We cannot see the enemy." The Queen convened an emergency council. Faces once calm now showed fear. This was not a challenge that strength alone could answer. For the first time, the children were not just observers. They were invited to speak. The oldest studied the data streams, her expression focused. "This enemy removes connections," she said. "They do not conquer. They isolate." "Why?" an advisor asked. "Because isolated systems break themselves," she replied. "They don't need to destroy us. They let us collapse." Silence followed. Elias stood near the back of the chamber, older now, his hair touched by gray, but his posture steady. He watched the children carefully. This moment, more than any trial, showed what humanity had truly given this kingdom. "We cannot fight this like we fight others," the second child said. "We must stay connected." "How?" a commander asked. "Our systems are failing." The third child stepped forward. "Then we stop relying on single systems," they said. We become flexible. The plan that followed was unlike any strategy Varelian had ever attempted. Instead of central command, they decentralized. Instead of fixed routes, they created shifting networks. Human-style redundancy was applied everywhere. No single failure could collapse the whole. Civilian ships were trained as communication relays. Trade fleets doubled as information carriers. Old, simple technologies were brought back because they could not be easily disrupted. The kingdom did not harden. It adapted. When the ancient entity struck again, it found something unexpected. Systems failed, but the kingdom did not panic. Local leaders acted independently, but in alignment. Fleets moved without waiting for orders. Information flowed through unconventional paths. This should not be possible, the entity calculated. Their structure is unstable, yet that instability was their strength. The first direct contact came when one of the entity's constructs entered Varelian space. It was vast, silent, and emotionless. A weapon designed to erase resistance. The fleet that met it was smaller than expected. Elias watched from the command deck, the children beside the queen. There was no fear in their faces, only focus. The construct fired first. Varelian ships did not meet force with force. They redirected energy, absorbed pressure, shifted formations. When systems failed, crews adapted manually. When plans collapsed, new ones formed instantly. The battle did not end with destruction. It ended with exhaustion. The construct withdrew, damaged not in body, but in prediction. Its models no longer worked. The ancient entity reconsidered. It observed the children closely now. They were not anomalies. They were patterns. This lineage does not seek dominance, it concluded. It seeks continuity. For the first time in its long existence, the entity hesitated. The final confrontation was not a battle. It was a choice. Through a narrow channel of communication, the entity reached out. Not with threats, but with a question. Why do you persist? It asked. All systems fail eventually. The oldest child answered, because we change before we fail. There was a long pause. The entity withdrew from Varelian space. Not destroyed, not defeated, avoiding. Across the galaxy, observers struggled to understand what had happened. No great victory. No conquest. No empire declared. Yet Varelian emerged stronger than ever. The queen stood once more on the high balcony, the city glowing below. Elias stood beside her, watching the stars. Your people saved us, she said. Our people learned from yours, Elias replied. The children joined them, no longer children in truth, but heirs shaped by two worlds. The queen looked at them with pride and relief. My kingdom will endure, she said, and adapt, Elias added softly. Far beyond, in the endless dark, the galaxy adjusted its understanding of humanity. They were not the strongest. They were not the oldest. They were something far more dangerous to stagnation. They were survivors, and through them, the future would always find a way forward.